Hi again then guys, and welcome to another car review, of course from the 1.47 update in GT Sport, and this time we're featuring a car which I certainly hadn't predicted for the game. I'm very happy actually that they brought this one. It makes sense to have a car like this in Gran Turismo. It's iconic, it's a racer, of course it suits the high roller category very well, but at the same time I would have probably guessed that something like maybe 300 SLR, or certainly the 300 SL Gullwing, the road version, would arrive before this in the game, or in the case of the Gullwing, return to the franchise before something like this would debut. Now the first question that many of you have, if you haven't bought this one already, is can you use it in the Nostalgic Cup events to win? Because although many people think, oh, 2 million, it's quite a lot for a car like this, at the same time, for a high roller, that's not a lot at all. In fact, it's one of the most affordable high rollers in the game. So, it's a two-part answer. Could it win? Yes, theoretically. Will it? Probably not. Because there are two crucial things really about this car. First one is the top speed is trash. Now at the time it was decent enough to win, but nowadays 150 miles an hour from a car that has this 6.8 litre 420 horsepower V8 just does not sound that great. And the reason why it doesn't sound that great is because it isn't anymore. You put that even up against, you know, your P4s, your XJ13s, even some of the slightly slower ones like a 250 GTO, or to be honest, something like a Mack Mustang that will show up in those events. You're going to lose, in a straight line at least, so forget winning at Lasart. Other events like that you'll struggle as well. Here at Goodwood it's not as much of an issue, but even then I did tune the gearbox to give it that fifth gear to work with and to get more speed out of it. Now the reason why I say yes and no in terms of can this car win is because, of course, with the right driver, almost anything is possible. However, for most of us, myself included, I don't feel that this car really has the raw ability, and even if I expand that argument to being fully tuned, which will cost you a lot of points and of course will make the car a lot faster, even then it just doesn't feel fast enough to beat the aforementioned prototype class machines from back in the day. Now you can beat Daytonas with it, because I beat one and catch up with the second one even in this video, but beyond that, you are going to struggle. Now, the Daytona even can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, and that's my favourite car in the game, and I'll freely admit that, because of just that huge top-end speed advantage that, especially the Ferrari, the Ford Mark IV, the Jag, etc., they easily have that advantage. This car, you really have to work for it. Now, beyond that, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy it. I will say, though, that this feels more so than some of the other high rollers to be even more of a collector's piece than a competition-ready machine. And what I mean by that is fairly simple. As I just said, it won't necessarily always win, but if you are a fan of these old-school racers, if you love collecting cars in Gran Turismo, then it will definitely appeal to you. For obvious reasons, and it should appeal to you. It's a great car, it's an icon, one of the most iconic Mercedes race cars ever, maybe even like top 5. So for all of those things, of course it's great. I love the way it looks, the graphics are good. In fact, the only thing that slightly lets it down for me is that the steering wheel in cockpit mode looks a little bit rough. It's not quite as rounded as you would hope. Now that could be a similar issue to the Porsche with the headlights in the older generation 911 Turbo that we had, where some people said that if you left it for like 4 or 5 minutes into the race, it would become smoother and more textured. That could be true. Didn't happen for me with the Porsche, didn't happen with this Mercedes either. So, of course, it's my duty to point that out. In terms of its ability, it's great for the time, and very much so this feels like some kind of old school like IMSA, or even old school like stock car from America would feel. It feels like a German muscle car, which is pretty much what it is. And that hasn't really changed much even till modern times with AMGs now. A lot of AMGs will have big V8s, more torque than power, rear-wheel drive, they're tail-happy, big, large, heavy vehicles, very, very American style. And Germany, in their car culture, does tend to have quite a lot of love for American cars. Geiger cars, for instance, they tune up a lot of American stuff. This one has a lot of muscle car appeal, and I think that if you are the kind of person who is, you know, pining for a Plymouth Superbird or some kind of old school NASCAR to be added to the game, you will love this one, because it really plays into that kind of style, that kind of feel to its handling, the physics even. it looks the part, it sounds great. It's actually one of my favourite recent additions to the game in terms of the way it sounds. It's got quite a nice deep burble to it. It doesn't necessarily sound quite as nice as my treasured Daytona, but it's a completely different kind of sound. So in terms of pricing, it's very good for a high roller, but it's also a lot cheaper for a couple of reasons. One, it's not necessarily as much of a treasured icon as something like a GTO, which is fair enough, but also it's cheaper because it's not as fast. Now, obviously that doesn't always apply, because something, for instance, like the Ford GT40, the cheaper one, which you can use at Blue Moon Bay, that is a monster of a car. As far as I know, though, it just can't compete because it's not Group X, if I recall correctly. That may be wrong, but I think that's the case. But that's a brilliant machine. So pricing isn't everything, but I do certainly think that the performance does factor into this one being 2 million. I would happily pay like 10 million for this thing, but I would also pay 10 million for a Ford Model T. So I'm not necessarily the best judge of what cars should be worth in a game, or at least what I'm willing to pay for them. I know a lot of people have issues with these high rollers and don't like to be saving up for that long for them. The reason why I like it is twofold. One, it means that the people who buy it tend to be the people who are willing to put the work in, so it's not like the Tomahawk where you just see every noob pulling up in it because it's so attainable. I like the fact that these are not as attainable because it makes them more special. The second reason why I like it is because, in a similar vein, it gives you something to work towards, and you value a car, especially from a collector's point of view, far more if you've had to, do a couple of dozen Blue Moon Bay events or Red Bull events or just racing in general to earn that vehicle. And realistically, it is actually the closest thing we've got to unlocking cars, because of course you don't have to unlock any of them really now. There are a couple technically, like the Nissan Pace car, but nothing significant that you would actually want to have in a traditional collection. Having a high price is the closest thing to that. And for me, I miss that, as I've said before on the channel, the days of having a tarp-covered car that you win from only doing a certain event, or getting, all gold in missions or something. I love that kind of thing. It gives you something to work towards. Unfortunately, those days are gone because it's pay to win and all of that loot box mentality. So for me, and for those of maybe my generation, like 20s, maybe even 30s, we probably value stuff like this and attaining it and working for it more than perhaps some of the younger generation will. And I'm certainly not generalising there, I'm not saying it's everyone. But I get why the car's 2 million, I would have happily paid more. I think it's a good price. I would have expected anywhere between 1 and 10. In terms of performance, as I said, it's what it is, it's good for its time, it still feels great. The handling in particular is easily the best thing about it. I love the way that the chunky tyres give you a surprisingly good amount of grip, but at the same time that bouncy old school really stiff suspension makes it feel authentic. The body roll, which is kind of a weird dichotomy of having body roll but feeling like it doesn't have body roll, if you know what I mean. It kind of bounces through corners but doesn't sway too much, which feels great. And the car has an authentic look when you watch it racing. It looks like watching Goodwood Revival, like an old school car trundling past with this big burbling V8. I love that. I love the vibe that the car has. I love the way that they've implemented it into the game. And of course Group X is unfortunate, but at least it's got a ton of playmates and some events that you can use that for. So for me, this is one of those occasions where I would definitely say this is more of a collector's piece than a race winner, but you could win races with it if you're good enough and if you're willing to, let's be honest, fork out quite a few points to tune up this thing. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts on the 300 SEL. Of course, stick around for more reviews on the channel, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.